Welcome, everyone. I'm your co-host, D.J.R. Stewart, the man with
Yep.
infinite intelligence.
And I'm your co-host, D. Tommy D. Duncan III, otherwise known as TD3. It is Wednesday, March the 13th, 2024. And if it is Wednesday night,
There's certainly Black Men Speak. So let's give a shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music, to Forest Films in our own studio for providing our studio. And if you haven't already, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and then feel free to take the link and share with others. And if you're here watching the show live, invite a couple of friends with you so you guys will have something interesting to talk about for the rest of the week. That being said, Tom, let's do what we do best, which is bring the leading news concerning Black people to the internet and to the social media. So I know we got a jam-packed show with some interesting guests. So let's get started.
all right, it's time to breathe the funk. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for joining us this evening. Of course, we've got a great show for you tonight. Our primary focus tonight will be on the expat experience. We've had three very interesting guests who are and or are living out of the country right now. And there's a growing number of Americans, who have been leaving the country to live overseas all around the world. And the Black community is no exception to that. We have a growing number of folks who are living overseas. So we're going to talk about what that experience is like and if it's something that you might want to consider in your future. So also, we're going to talk very briefly about the latest news this week in Haiti that we have been covering for the last several months. Prime Minister Ariel Henry recently resigned. And what does that mean for the country?
That means the gang leader barbecue is in charge, Tom.
Well, we will definitely see. So before we get started with that, let's go ahead and have our birthday shout outs. For those that you may be sharing a birthday with, if you have a March birthday, the young lady that we affectionately call the GOAT has a birthday coming up tomorrow, Jimmy. Simone Biles, I think bar none, the greatest gymnast likely of all time, Jimmy, probably with no exception, has a birthday coming up on March the 14th on tomorrow. So wishing her a early happy birthday. Hope she has a fantastic birthday. And then also the great musician Will I Am has a birthday coming up on March the 15th. Not only a great singer and entertainer, but also has a certain, unique style and flash with it.
Yes, he does.
Yes, he does. So early happy birthday to you as well. One of the probably greatest unsung actors, Jimmy, one of my favorites, Clifton Powell, has a birthday coming up on March the 16th in just a couple of days. Jimmy, typically he is in supporting roles, but, he is almost like the guy who comes in, not the major player, but sometimes comes in and steals the show. Clifton Powell is just a phenomenal actor.
Yes.
Has a birthday on March the 16th. And last, but definitely not least, we have the Queen Latifah. For those of us who are for those of us who are a little bit old school, we know her back as being one of the queens of rap, Jimmy, but she has reinvented herself. And for the young folks, you only know her as a movie star and a TV talent.
Yes, in fact, I was just watching her latest episode of Equalizer from over the weekend. So yes, great actress, great talent all the way around, and a great voice. She can sing.
Yeah. Now I've only seen her sing once, Jimmy, but you know what? You are correct. You are correct, and she
has some lungs on it. She can sing too, rap, act. So yeah, she's all around talent.
Multi-talented individual, and I mean on the television, on movies, she just be straight jacking up people, doing karate jujitsu and everything else, Jimmy. All right, so those are our happy birthdays. Happy birthday to everyone out there who has a mid to late March birthday. As we would say, we don't have the theme song from Stevie Wonder, but happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday. All right.
It seems like we would have more birthdays in March since these are summer babies that were made in the summer. But
all right, and we're going to talk very briefly before we get to our main topic for today, Jimmy. We have been covering the story of what's been going on in Haiti for several months, or really a couple of years now, since the former president was assassinated in his bedroom. But
why don't we do this? I know, not to cut you off, but I know one of our guests, Uncle Sar, was interested in this topic. Do you think we can bring the guest on a little earlier so Uncle Sar
Okay,
can maybe join?
okay. In that case, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and bring in Uncle Asar, who is one of our special guests talking about the expat experience. But we'll go ahead and bring in Uncle Asar to talk very briefly about what's going on here. And matter of fact, Jimmy, it looks like I need to. There we go. All right, so we're bringing Uncle Asar into the show as we talk briefly about what's going on in Haiti right now. Good evening, and thank you for joining us, brother. How's everything going?
Everything is everything, man. Appreciate you having me.
All right, good deal. So we're going to talk very briefly and give an update as to what's going on in Haiti right now. We want to welcome Dominique Vinings into the chat line. I want to thank her for joining us this evening out of the Atlanta area. And let's get to the show. So let's kind of talk about this. Earlier this week, amid pressure from internal and external forces, Ariel Henry, who was the appointed Prime Minister of Haiti, has chosen to resign following weeks of mounting pressure and increased violence in Haiti, which comes after several regional leaders of the CARICOM met in Jamaica to discuss the political transition in the country. As we've talked about before, the United Nations has been pushing for Kenyans to deploy about 1,000 troops to help neutralize the violence and bloodshed that's going on in Haiti right now. And, you know, a lot of the folks in Haiti, of course, don't particularly or aren't big fans of Henry, of course, not being an elected leader, and doesn't feel like his governance has really been helping the country very much. So this is something that we're going to be tracking for a little while. May talk a little bit more about it next week. But this has pretty significant implications. We know that the United States has a deep and I would say sometimes sordid history as it pertains to the affairs in Haiti. But let's talk about this very briefly until we get into our main topic for this evening. What say you, Jimmy?
Well, Tom, the reason he had to resign is for this very reason, because they were pushing to have the situation corrected. And the fact that you have the Kenyan forces waiting on standby, and I've said this for many times, and we're going to continue to say it, that no nation is going to send their military into another nation except the U.S. and maybe Russia can get away with this without what's called a SFA, a status of force agreement. And what that is that you are agreeing not to prosecute soldiers from a foreign land for any crimes they may commit while they're fighting in your country. And you need a government, and need someone who represents the government to sign that agreement. If you don't have that agreement, then no country is going to be able to send their forces in, i.e. that means Kenya doesn't get in play. So the money that's been raised so far, $300 million by our country and millions more by other countries, it's pretty much going to go to mercenaries. They're going to have to go in and do the fighting if you can find a mercenary group to go do it, and they will do it for the right amount of money. So it's just a matter of putting up the right amount of money to have them go in. But that's how it's going to get done, because there's no one to represent the government, the people of Haiti, to sign any kind of SFA to allow a foreign army to come in. And like I said, the only two countries that can get away with sending soldiers into your country, killing up people, blowing up stuff, and then walk away and go home without any charges filed against them is the United States and maybe Russia to a lesser degree.
Gotcha. And I know you've been tracking this as well, Brother Asar. What are your thoughts, and what have you been tracking on this story?
Yeah, I want to begin by publicly condemning what's going on in Gaza. The people of Israel are committing genocide against the Palestinians, and I think that needs to be said publicly with the help of the U.S. So with that said, we're looking at a similar situation in terms of political, financial, social genocide of Haiti, at least since, as the sister documents, at least since 1984, where sanctions have been put on the country, and as Jimmy said, that the people haven't had an opportunity to govern themselves through legitimate elections. They've been under the rule of puppets, implanted by the U.S. government. So nothing has changed. And as he said, that money will be gone, will be used to go to, will be used for mercenaries to again implement whatever strategy, paradigm, whatever you want to call it, for the U.S. and the, we'll want to say neo-colonial powers, but they're still the colonial powers. Yeah.
And for those of you,
well, if you want to know, who the next leader of Haiti is going to be, go ask the CIA. They'll tell you.
That's true. And again, this is really, hate to say it, and it may sound a little bit kooky, but for those of you who don't understand the history of Haiti, the United States, first and foremost, owes a great deal, and African Americans, for that matter, owe a great deal to the Haitians for the influence that they had on the abolition of slavery. Because when you as
they were the catalyst,
when you as a group of enslaved Africans are able to, under the right leadership, beat back and defeat the greatest military power at that point in time in France and take freedom over your own country, unfortunately, no good deed goes unpunished. And this has been something that, in essence, has been executed by not only the United States, but the French, and to a certain degree, the Canadians, for well over 100 years. And so when the French said that they will never let the Haitians live down that, they meant it. I'm sorry, go right ahead. I'm just sorry.
No, I just wanted to say they not only whipped up.
Wait a second. Go ahead.
Yeah, it wasn't just a defeat of Napoleon.
Right.
It wasn't just a defeat of Napoleon. It was the fact that in retribution for Napoleon sending the army to try to put them back into slavery, they killed every white person on the island,
right,
except the doctors.
Okay.
So it was that was a catalyst that scared the Europeans out of the slavery business. The Brits got out of it shortly right after that and spent 1/4 of their national wealth, and they were one of the richest countries in the world at that time, to buy their way out of slavery in all their colonies. So that was a catalyst to start the collapse of the whole slavery system on a global. So the world owes, especially those who are descendants of slaves, a great deal of gratitude, and the world owes a great deal of gratitude to the Haitian people. What they did was barbaric, and from our outside views, but it was something that needed to be done. I wish that when you look at our history of Jim Brown and Nat Turner and others, that many of those rebellions have resulted in similar results.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that Haiti not only defeated the French, but they also defeated the greatest armada, whatever you want to call it, seafaring army, the British. They also whipped up on the Portuguese and, to some extent, the Americans who wanted to come in and get their piece of the pie. And as Jimmy said, they bankrupt France to the extent that Napoleon had to sell his holdings on the North American continent, which overnight doubled the size of the U.S. And then Haiti notably is the first country that enshrined that there should be no races in their constitution. So the world does owe Haiti a great debt.
And for those of you who remember to stay asleep in American history, that thing called the Louisiana Purchase, directly tied to Haiti, nobody wants to talk to that. Anyway, with that being said, we're about 15 minutes in, and we want to make sure that we have plenty of time, because we will definitely talk about this later, because this is going to be an ongoing saga. We're going to bring in our other two special guests this evening, so we can get started, with, oh my God, the exciting and rest of the show. So we are going to welcome Coach Tish out of Mexico, and we're going to allow everyone to briefly introduce themselves, where they're from, where they're hailing from right now, and talk a little bit about what this whole wave of that we've been seeing on the expat experience. So with that being said, we're going to have everyone to formally introduce themselves. Of course, ladies first. We'll start out with Coach Tish, and then Uncle Asar, and then Mitch. And Mitch, if you are there, your video is not on, so we hope that you are in play. So, Coach Tish, start us out.
I'm going to turn my camera off top so we can square this.
I'm sorry, repeat that?
There.
Okay. His camera off.
Okay, good deal. So, why don't we start off? Tell us about where you're from originally, where you hail from now, and then we will get started, and we'll do the same for Uncle Asar.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. So I go by Coach Tish. You can, where I'm originally from the South Side of Chicago, right? My family still lives there. My mother grew up in Gary, right down the street from the Jacksons. So yeah, Midwest, but I'm currently based in a little beach town, about 45 minutes south of Cancun called Playa del Carmen. And I've been
Yes.
here about 6 years.
Good deal. Perfect. Perfect. All right, Uncle Asar, tell us about yourself because you had a similar experience, even though a different set of circumstances in a different location.
Yeah, man. As you know, I'm originally from little old Bryan, Texas, right down the street, home of Texas A&M University, Aggie land, and I have several homes. I read, I can't remember what book it was, but it's talking about the black man has several homes because any place can be hostile, and if it's hostile, then it's not home. So I have many homes. My mother uh, born me in Bryan, Texas. I then moved to Washington, D.C., where I spent the next half of my life, about 23 and a half years. And then during that time, I moved to Lagos, Nigeria. I had been traveling there for several years and spent a lot of time in Ghana. I have a daughter there. So again, I have several homes. And now I'm based in Austin, Texas. I don't consider Austin my home. It's just where I am at the moment.
All right, good deal. So let's kind of get started with the narrative, and let me make sure that we do have a couple of folks on the chat line who have joined us. Miss Bosie Scott, out of I think she may be in Costa Rica this week, but she is based in Colombia as well. Miss Tanya Hall, I want to thank her for joining us as well out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Listen to her new show on KGGR in the mornings and the afternoon. And so we want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. So we'll start out with you, Coach Tish. Tell us about being from the south side of Chicago. How did you end up in Mexico, and where you are in Mexico for that matter?
So I actually moved here from Maryland. So, ironically, the very first time that I went abroad, I went to Nigeria. My college roommate was getting married, and that was my first time ever having a passport. And on the way there, I had a layover in Madrid. Um, and so, when you have a 12-hour layover, you leave your stuff in the airport and you go traveling, even if it's your first time traveling. At least that's what Southsiders do. But yeah, that was my very first time abroad, being outside of Chicago. I think the thing that shocked me the most, and I've lived all over the country, but I did not know that there were places in the world where it was summertime in the wintertime. So when I went to Nigeria, it's 80 something, 90 something degrees in December. So coming from Chicago, sub-zero temperatures, it was like, oh, this is like, I want this life. So it took me a while to kind of figure out how to make it work. I initially, when I went abroad, the only thing that I knew people did were they taught English, they taught math, or they were in the Peace Corps. And I knew I didn't want to do any of those. So it took me a minute for, I think, technology to catch up. And by the time it did, I had gotten several coach certifications. I started coaching. And quite honestly, a layoff is how I ended up in Mexico. I was laid off in 2018. And that just felt like, permission. It was like, it almost felt like, you were free to roam the cabin type of a situation. So in my mind, it was like, all right, I want to go to Bali, Thailand, or Mexico. And really, Mexico came up because I'd taken Spanish in college and high school. And it was nearby. So it wasn't, I'm quite honestly, it wasn't a lot of research. I know a lot of people research stresses me out, too much of it anyway. And so Mexico seemed like a great idea. I have grandparents who have experienced dementia, right? I think we probably all know somebody who has Alzheimer's. And so, I'm really into holistic health. And I knew that, well, if I went somewhere where I could become fluent in the language, that would, get some brain cells popping, right? So that would help, in my opinion, stave off dementia. So I was like, all right, well, Mexico seems like a greater idea. And because I'd been thinking about this for 10 years prior, I was in all the travel groups and I heard of 2 places in Mexico, Mexico City and Playa del Carmen. And I'm a big person. I put, on signs, right? So listening for signs and looking for symbols. And one day I was walking in the gym, and as I was walking in, there was a girl walking out, and she had a shirt that said Playa del Carmen, Playa del Carmen. I was like, okay, that's where I'm going. And so that's where I wound up 6 years ago.
All right. That sounds great. We appreciate your story. All right. Uncle Assad, tell us about your story and your travels and where you've been.
Yeah, well, I think the audience probably, if they saw the episode where I talked about Kwanzaa and Pan-Africanism, they know my story. I try to keep it brief. Again, I'm a Pan-African.
Some of those folks may not be here tonight, so make sure that you don't miss anything.
Okay. Well, I'm a Pan-Africanist. And so early on, it was my dream to go to Africa, to the continent. And I had plenty of opportunities to travel to, all expenses paid, working with young people. One of the programs, they sent 6 young people to Paris and London every year. And I was like coach, it was my first trip out of the country other than Mexico and Canada. It was like, okay, well, I'm not trying to go anywhere but Africa. That's my first trip. So I got a passport. Again, like Coach Trish, it was a wedding. My friend's sister was getting married. He told me in January of that year she was getting married in December. And turns out everybody in the country gets married in December. So it was, we went, but I got off the plane, went to a dinner, went to a club, went to a party that same night. I got off the plane at 10 p.m. and never stopped. So that was fantastic. So I started going back, and then we started visiting Ghana, and subsequently I ended up with a daughter in Ghana. And I participated in medical missions and traveled all over Nigeria. Spent a lot of time in Ghana with my daughter after she was born. And in 2013, I was leaving my apartment. Coach, we were talking in the green room about the DC area. I had lived in my apartment in DC, downtown DC, Northwest, for 23 and a half years, and I was moving out. I got gentrified out. And a friend of mine, I was working on some original rhyming African children's stories, and I sent the forward to her, and she was like, how would you like to come to Nigeria and write and research? And I was like, cool, because I got nowhere else to go. And we decided that I would stay for 3 months. And I ended up staying in Nigeria 3 years. It's a very interesting story how I had a year visa, but I was there for 3.5 years. It's an even more interesting story how I got out of the country. But so yeah, I spent a lot of time in Ghana as well. The longest period of time I stayed in Ghana was probably 6 weeks, but I did that on a number of occasions, again, to establish a relationship with my daughter. And then I do like to travel. Unfortunately, fortunately, I've never had a 12-hour layover. I've been through several countries, but the longest has been like 5 hours. And I think I was in Germany or something. It was a layover, and I had to sleep on the, like the people are sleeping on the chairs. That was the worst experience of my life, man. I was like, wow, this is crazy. But since then, like I said, I have many homes. I have some close friends who have in-laws who are Jamaican. I'm going back to Jamaica in November. I just returned from Brazil in February for the second time. I consider all those places home because it's not the place that makes it home. It's the people and the relationships that you build and establish while you're there. So again, my brother's here in Austin, and as Tommy mentioned on a previous episode, we just lost my mother. So Brian, that's off the map now. That's where my mother was. But my brother's here in Austin, and as long as he's here, then I have a home here. Although I may, just jump up and leave, go somewhere else.
Perfect. We appreciate you sharing this.
Uncle Saul, you trying to tell us you're an illegal immigrant in Nigeria?
I may be an illegal immigrant in the U.S.
Amen.
Is anybody looking for you? Man?
Exactly.
I don't know.
The Nigerian government looking for you?
Don't be trying to start nothing. All right, Mitch, we're going to have Mitch to join us as well. The video is not coming in right now, but I believe you should be on audio. Mitch, can you hear us or can you hear me?
Okay, I don't think we have audio or video from Mitch, unfortunately.
Oh.
So we may have to bring Mitch back another day.
Okay, well, stay on, Mitch. I'm not exactly sure. Hopefully, we can get you back in. Mitch, by the way, is in Colombia, Medellin, and he has been there a couple of years and is from the New York City area. So I was definitely interested in having him share his story as well. But Jimmy, maybe we can work with Mitch on the back end and see if we can figure out how to get at least his audio working, if nothing else, so that he can share his story as well. So with that being said, what we're going to do is we're going to go with, of course, Coach Tish and Asar and get started with the short story. So again, y'all both have talked a little bit about the how part of moving to the countries that you moved to. So let's talk about, especially for those who maybe thought about this before, have traveled, vacation, things of that nature, but haven't really stayed there more than maybe a couple of weeks or something of that nature. Give us a little insight on what living abroad has been like for you, especially being an American citizen, taking the jump or the leap of faith, as we'll call it. And also what I'd like to do before we get started, because this will go very fast, we want to acknowledge a couple of folks in the chat line. Ms. Carol Wilson, thank you for joining us this evening. What's up on your end? Irvin Kimball, Medellin, Colombia, thank you for joining us as well. Ms. Audrey K. Booker out of the Dallas area. And by the way, Coach Tish, we have a fellow Chicagoan, Ms. Dominique Vinings is out of the Chicago area. So what we'll ask that our guests do as we're talking through this, please ask as many questions or put as much thought into what you can. And what we'll do is we'll make sure we have our guests to address any questions that you might have. So let's talk a little bit about your experience, Coach Tish. Tell us about what living abroad, the first time that you were there and what that looked like. What did you expect and what did you experience? And being an American citizen, never having lived overseas before, what was that experience like once you realized, man, I'm really here?
Okay, so so I lived in Belize for 2 months.
Right.
Before I came to Mexico. So it wasn't exactly my first time being abroad for an extended amount of time.
Now, were you intentional in living in Belize, or did you just?
I thought I was moving.
Okay.
I thought I was moving. I told everybody I was moving. I sold everything, and
before
then
you went to Belize.
Yeah, well, before I went to Mexico. So I moved to Mexico in 2018.
Okay.
I attempted to move to Belize in like 2013.
Talk about that first. Talk about that first. Then we want to hear about the attempt.
So I went to Belize because I previously went to massage school and I heard about this Belizean or Mayan abdominal massage. Mm-hmm. And where they did it, or the person who had made it popular, was in Belize. And so I went to Belize because, well, first I heard about the Griffina people who had never been enslaved. And so I was convinced that I was going there and I was going to meet Griffina people and I was going to study indigenous healing traditions. And so I didn't, again, I'm not a big researcher. I knew a little bit. And I met someone who introduced me to, or basically who just told me, I told her what I was doing. I heard a voice say that I was going to study indigenous healing traditions. She said, oh, the same thing happened to me. I'm going to connect you with my brother. She called her brother. It just so happened she was Belizean. She called her brother. Her brother said, oh, just bring a swimsuit. You'll be fine. And so I lived in the back of a gift shop in Hopkins, Belize. So they had a gift shop in the front and they lived in the back. And so, yeah, that's where I lived. And so I honestly did not know what to expect. I had no clue. I read somewhere online that you could take a bus. You could fly into Cancun and take a bus from Cancun to Belize City. And so I did. And I was just open. I was open to the experience. It was a lot of English spoken there. So I wasn't quite, I think that was probably one of the things I didn't expect.
That they spoke English.
What's that?
That they spoke English, or what is it that you
Yeah,
did?
I thought because it's in Central America, there would be a lot more Spanish speakers,
Correct.
but it was
Belize
a
speaks
lot.
English. It's
It
official
was a
language.
lot of English. Mostly English is I think the official, maybe the official language.
Yes.
And I thought that I had this idea. I had really thought that I would, meet herbalists and all these people doing natural things. And what I found was that was true. And some of the same health issues that Black people experience in the US, they were also experiencing in Belize. So high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. I actually found, I think that was kind of I was like, okay, that's interesting, right? Like there was a lot of fried food. It wasn't, even though it's in the Caribbean and people eat vegetables, it wasn't like salads. Right? It wasn't like cold vegetables. So, we ate a lot of rice and beans and rice, two different dishes. But yeah, it was a lot of carbs. And yeah, that was the interesting part for me was okay. I think that was probably the thing that I was not expecting the most. But that was, like I said, in 2013. So when I went, they have these retired school buses that go throughout the entire country. And so riding through the country, like you'd see these rolling green hills, like it looked like a movie. I don't know what it looks like now because I haven't been there. Unfortunately, I haven't been back since, but it was beautiful. I mean, it really felt like a dream almost.
Good deal. Good deal. All right. I am told that we may have Mitch back, at least on audio. So, Mitch, are you there? Mitch, are you there? If you are on mute, take yourself off of mute because I cannot hear you. Okay, so we still are having audio issues on Mitch's side. We will continue to work on that. All right, let's transition over to Uncle Asar and talk a little bit about, your big move to the motherland of the African continent, how that happened, and once you were there, and I know you talked a little bit about this kind of in your introduction, and I know you have a different level of consciousness. So talk to us about once you were like firmly seated there, what that transition looked like in terms of what you expected and what you experienced.
So let me say this first. My first trip to Nigeria, because Coach talked about her experiences, traveling abroad. I'm probably not, or planning, your question around planning or what the shit they do, I'm probably not the person to talk to about that. And I get more into that about when I ended up staying 3 months. I mean, that's obvious. 3 months and I ended up staying 3 years. There's no planning in that.
Correct.
But my first trip to Nigeria, I kind of, I knew of the indoctrination of how we, through white pathology, known as white supremacy, but it's really white pathology, of how we're taught to think about ourselves in Africa. So I tried to put that out of my mind. So when I got there, I really had no expectations, and I just tried to absorb everything. Funny thing happened was, again, it was my boy's sister was getting married, so I was always around a lot of women, because she was there and everybody was involved. And I remember one day we were in the house, and this group of women, her bridesmaids, they were talking, and I was sitting at the table, and all of a sudden they turned to me and they were like, "Asar, what are your first impressions of Africa?" And I said, being the flirt that I am, I said, well, I really expected to see more bare-breasted women. And they just cracked up. So I say that to say, well, I didn't have any expectations, really. And I just absorbed everything. So by the time I ended up moving there, I had been there so many times and traveled all over the country. I kind of knew, you know what I'm saying? And as the coach said, the national language is English. And through listening to Fela Kuti and Femi Kuti, Afrobeat, I knew some pidgin English, so I could communicate if somebody didn't speak standard English, if you will. But most of the people speak English because it's the national language. Now, again, I had planned to go for 3 months, moved out of my apartment, put my stuff in storage, and just things started rolling. And fortunately, my friend had just moved into a new estate of condominiums, and so everything was brand new. And so as long as I was on the inside of that gate, everything was like Shangri-La. But once I went on the outside of the gate on my own, I had to catch public transportation. I had to navigate the motorcycle taxi, the Okada. We got chased by the police twice in a bus in one day, that kind of thing. I remember when I would get on Okada, the motorcycle taxi, I would tell the guy, go slow, go slow. It's a pigeon term, but he knows what it means, go slow. And he thought I meant don't go slow or something. I think I may have said don't go fast. He thought I meant go. Man, he was flying. And incidentally, the term Okada comes from an airline, a defunct airline in Nigeria, and they say it means to fly. So he was flying. And I got off the thing and I was like, brother, what? He said, oh, I thought you said don't go slow. But it was a different experience from visiting, because when you're visiting, it's club every night, it's a party every night. I had on one occasion, I always say that the first time I went, they treated me like royalty. The second time they treated me like a guest, and the third time I went, they treated me like family, because they left me in a 3-bedroom guest house, and I had 2 cooks. And for like 2 days, I didn't hear from anybody. And then they show up, oh, we forgot you were here, because they treat me like family, right? So yeah, it was different from visiting and then finally moving there, because I had to establish relationships and leverage that into work to earn money. Again, navigate the outside world on public transportation, that type of thing. So yeah, I mean, it was different.
Gotcha. All right, going back to Coach Tish, and I know that it wasn't really a plan for you. It just kind of evolved as you went. And we're going to kind of transition to your experience in Mexico. And we do have a question from Ms. Tanya. It says, Coach, what years were you in Mexico? You're currently in Mexico, and I believe you said you've been there 6 years now, right?
Yeah, since 2018.
Okay, so let me ask you this. What was the biggest adjustment that you had to make in living outside of the United States?
The biggest adjustment
that you had to make in living outside of whether that's dealing with the people, culture, just everyday things. I mean, nothing, big, but just everyday things that you had to learn to adjust to living outside of the United States. Or was it really just kind of easy peasy? No adjustment at all?
So I wouldn't say that, right? There were 2 things that I think that I really had to get used to. I'm from Chicago, right? Yeah. So I left Chicago and I moved to the Baltimore area, and I'm used to Black stuff. So much so that I don't even think about it, right? Like, I don't even think about, I can go to a concert, I can go to a play, I can go to a movie. Like, it never dawned on me how much my culture, like, that was my entertainment. Like, that's where, I got used to being around people like me who knew the songs that I knew and watched the movies that I watched. And even though there were Black people here, right, there was a smaller expat community here. We, like they say, Black people are not a monolith. And so I think that was probably one of the biggest things that I had to get used to, is like, all right, if I don't have plays and, things that I'm used to, there's no August Wilson play showing. Right? How do I, like, where do I get entertainment? How do I get energized? Right? How do I get kind of that culture shock? Right? So that I feel good about myself. And so learning how to create that for myself, I think that was probably the biggest shock or shift.
Gotcha.
That I had to make.
And let me ask you this as well, kind of as a follow-on to that. I mean, when most people, you think of Mexico, unfortunately, you think, especially from an American's point of view, you get Mexico just like you get Black in America from the mainstream propaganda that we call U.S. mass media. So you look at Mexico from the point of view of mainstream news, and you get there and you experience something completely different. So the question is, what is it like going with the United States view of Mexico, and then you get there and you experience this whole different thing.
So
And
here's the thing. I don't know what the U.S. view is. Yay, Mitch is here.
Am I here? I've been in limbo for like the last half hour.
I know it. I know it. Why don't we do this? While you are here, we're going to transition to Mitch. You haven't had a chance to even begin telling us about your story. We know you from New York. You ended up in Medellin, and more. Let's take advantage of this while we got you here. Start off by telling us who you are, where you're from, and how you ended up in Medellin, and then we'll go ahead and bring all the gumbo in.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. My name is Mitch Messer. I am here in Medellin, Colombia. I'm originally from New York City, New York, and I see some friendly faces both on the screen and also in the chat. My wife and I have been here in Medellin this time around. We're here for about a little bit over a month. We were here last year for 6 months until they basically kicked us out. We got to spend some time with Tish there. You know, the irony of all this is I spent all day today on Zoom calls. I've been doing nothing but Zoom calls all day, and everything's been perfect. And now when I'm trying to get something done, the computer wants to act up and show out. So, but yeah, we have been here for long enough to know that this is going to be a significant part of our future. And I love the fact that we're starting to encourage friends to visit us here. We've had a few friends coming by and take a look, and some of them have decided to stick around and stay. Some are getting apartments, and some are starting to look into buying real estate. So yeah, we are very much delighted to be enjoying some time away from the U.S. with all the craziness that's going on back there and the bad weather. We're just happy to be here. And again, I'm particularly happy to be visible and audible, and happy to answer any questions that people have.
Okay, let me go to your next question, because both of our guests have answered a couple of questions already. What was, in your opinion, the biggest transition that you and your wife had to make in moving from a New York City of all places, you know, really the centerpiece, cosmopolitan city in the United States, to a Medellin?
Two things. First of all, we had to unlearn all that we were told to expect when we got here. I had family members saying, oh, you're going to be turned into a drug mule, or you're going to be caught in the crossfire of gang warfare. And we get here, and Monique and I look at each other and we're like, this is beautiful. I feel just as safe here as I felt any place in the United States. The people here are friendly. They're kind. All the things that people are being told about the so-called third world, I don't even like using that term. It's not true. This is not a dangerous place to be. Are there parts of Medellin that you should be mindful where you are? Sure, but there are parts of New York that you should be mindful where you are. There are parts of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So it bothers me to see so much negative publicity going on with respect to places like Colombia and Peru and Brazil and Argentina, because these are not dangerous places, and I think people should see for themselves. We've stopped talking about it so much because we sound like zealots. So I'm just encouraging people, don't take my word for it. Don't take the U.S. government's word for it. Come see it for yourself. See if you feel unsafe down here. See if you feel like you're not being valued as a person down here. And so far, no one that's visited has had any problems with the safety or with the level of satisfaction that they get from being in a place like Medellin.
Gotcha. No, I appreciate your feedback on that. And again, it's interesting because when you look at the propaganda that we call the mass media machine in the United States, a lot of people are still kind of in their ear of the Colombian drug lords and, you know, all the death and violence and so on and so forth in Colombia. And that still persists to a certain degree to this day, because they never go back and say, you know what? There are a lot of people who are getting jacked up in all parts of the United States, but unless it has to do with the Black community, we don't typically hear about that. So what's going on with that? Anyway, let's go back to Uncle Assad. And I have an interesting question for you, because, you know, you grew up in the United States. You grew up in Bryan, Texas, of all places, and you go to an all-Black country in Nigeria, and then you're in Ghana as well. Tell me about what it's like going from Bryan, Texas, even a DC for that matter, which I guess at that point in time could have been considered chocolate city, to an entire country?
Yeah, so I think that's the main point, is that I left Bryan and went to DC, Chocolate City, and I had an aunt that was living in Baltimore at the time, and she passed soon after I arrived. But my uncle took me to, I think it's Lexington Market in Baltimore, and I grew up in Bryan, but I grew up in in the hood. But I was like, there's a whole lot of black people, so that was that initial shock of seeing so many black people in the same place, and of course there was no riot. And to Mitch's point, Nigeria is always on the State Department's list of no travel. So forget all that mess. But the thing about when I moved, traveling to Nigeria and then being there for an extended period of time, is that the idea, and I'll explain, the idea of white privilege. Being fair skinned, when I went to Nigeria the first time, I saw white Jesus everywhere, and I was like, "Well, what's up with this?" So you get to understand the indoctrination in all the schools, are the British this school and the British this school, and everybody trying to be British and the way that they dress, this kind of thing. And they would call me Oibo, which means white man, and I didn't even know what they were saying the first time. My friend told me, they just call you white man. I was like, what? Why are they calling me white man? And in Nigeria, especially among the Yoruba, which my friends are, they have a lot of respect for elders. That's part of their culture, respect for elders, and they will prostrate before them, and people will, as they pass, they will curtsy and what I call duck and dodge. You see an older person, you do this, and it's very respectful. So I used to sit on my steps right around 5 o'clock when all the nannies would take the children to the park. So I'm checking out the nannies. But as I'm sitting there, people will pass by, and there's constantly ducking and diving, right? And I want to believe that they saw, because only a few years ago, less than 10 years ago, I was there. I want to believe that they saw me as an older person, but I'm sure it was a large part of they thought that I was white or considered me white, because I was called literally, not even Oibo, but white man. And I'm like, what? I was on a bus one time, and I told the brother to stop, it was my stop, and he was like, Oibo. And I was like, my best pigeon, I said something like, I'm black, I'm not Oibo. And I did my shirt like this. I said, you won't see, to show him the tackle meat on my chest. And the whole bus just erupted. There was another situation where I was invited to this huge wedding of these very affluent Nigerians. I mean, these people have never 5 Rolls Royce parked outside the venue. And I'm coming in this little taxi, and it was barely making it. We come up to the gate, and this guy has this huge dog on a chain, right? He's keeping everybody out. But I'm sitting in the back seat of this raggedy car, and he sees that I'm fair. I'm granted entrance. Now, I wanted to get in. I needed to get in because my employer had invited me. But at the same time, it's like I felt uncomfortable with it, as I felt a lot in Nigeria, because I know I gained privilege. And in some sense, a brother told me when that I befriended, the next door neighbor, he said that you actually needed that because you're not from here. But again, at the same time, although I needed it, I availed of it at times, it just didn't feel right. If any of that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. That makes complete sense. So you experienced privilege in a certain because of your skin tone.
Yeah, and it wasn't comfortable at all.
Gotcha. Well, I guess they're pretty comfortable with it here. But anyway, that's not so. Mitch, let me get back to you briefly. Tell us a little bit about how, and I'm going to get to all of y'all. I'm just starting with Mitch since he's had the least amount of time. How has living overseas now, even though it's only been a couple of years, changed your thinking, changed your life? One thing that I always go back in the autobiography of Malcolm X, it says travel broadens your scope.
Absolutely.
So I would presume that living abroad certainly broadens your scope. What has living abroad overseas, out of the United States, and being a U.S. citizen, how has that changed your thinking, and how has that broadened your scope and or changed your life?
Yeah, great question. So I will say that the lie that we're told that everything is better in the U.S. is put to the test and found to be to be the lie that it is once you get outside. A perfect example is my wife had a medical procedure done last year here in Medellin. And when we told folks back home what it cost, how little it cost, we got questions like, well, was it in a hospital? Was it indoors? Did they have electricity? And I'm like, we're not in the middle of a field with, this is a fully developed country. And oh, by the way, for the record, the healthcare in Colombia is ranked higher than the United States. So the United States is not at the top of the list for healthcare, and so that kind of arrogance that we bring with us, unfortunately, when we travel abroad, gets crushed once we see the reality of what's out there. The other thing that I'll mention is the level of or the lack of stress. I was thinking about this a couple of days ago. I'm from New York. In New York, there's traffic. Well, I thought that I'd seen traffic before. Then you get to Medellin and you see all the cars that you have in New York, plus motorcycles weaving in and out. But here's the thing, when we first got here, we're waiting for the eruption, right? Someone cut somebody off. We're waiting for someone to jump out of the car and grab somebody and yank, and it never happened. I'm like, oh, interesting. That was interesting. And then the second and third time didn't happen. It hasn't happened yet. We've been watching this for years now. They don't have that tension. They don't have that anger that seems to be normal in the US. And you feel it the minute you land back in the States and you get on the highway and you see people driving and flipping each other the bird. They don't have any of that. All that tension is just not there. And I love that. That to me, and it's hard to explain that. It's hard to explain it to somebody who's never seen it. But that for me makes all the difference. That level of tension and stress is just gone. And I thought that was possible to see it, but it's here. I see it every day. And I value that more than anything else. I mean, the cost of living is great. The weather's wonderful. The people are friendly. But just having that reduced level of stress that's always there in the U.S. and you don't notice it's gone until you get out.
Coach Tish, same thing for you. How has now living outside of the U.S. in Belize for a period of time, now in Mexico, how has that changed your thinking? How has that changed your life?
I mean, it feels like it's changed everything, right? And it was weird for me because when I came here, I was actually on unemployment, right? So when you think about being on unemployment, you think about at least being in the States, right? You're barely able to survive, right? $400 every week. Good luck. Like that's not really taking you in much of anywhere. But when I came here, $400 a week, I had my first tomahawk steak. I'd never had a tomahawk steak before. I was footing the bill for the round of margaritas. I had friends who had multi-million-dollar businesses. Like it was just like it really just changed what I thought was available and what was possible. Right? So even when I got a job, my first remote role, I was making like $37,000. Not much more than unemployment was paying. And with that $37,000, like my rent was $300 a month. I left my apartment and I went to Bali. I went to Thailand. Like I traveled the globe. And so and I would go back home. Now, mind you, from Mexico to Chicago, Cancun is a major international airport. So, going back and forth, I can get a same day ticket for $200 one way. So being this back close where I could go to the States, in my mind, I was like, I'm broke. But then when I went back to the States and I'm talking to people, I realized that my ideal of broke was broken. And it was like, wait, but I need $1 million. It was like, no, you making 1 million pesos. Like you actually, you're actually okay. But it took me a while to realize that, number one, I was different. I don't know what cities, New York and DC, about the blue lights, right? Like the blue lights in the hood, about the light pollution, right? That it never actually gets dark at night. you know that, you know, there's always sirens or dogs barking or gunshots or, you know, like, and that kind of thing keeps people on edge. I mean, I can only speak about Chicago, right? Like my family is from Inglewood, has lived in Inglewood my entire life. So going back home, like coming from technically the Caribbean, which somebody told me, and I was like, damn, that's true. I never thought about it. So coming from literally the Caribbean and going back to the South Side, like I didn't notice, but I began to notice, like, oh, the air is different. Like the vibe, like the vibration in the air, like everything is different. So, you know, everything has changed for me.
And what would you add to that, Asar, in terms
So
of?
I utilize that same Malcolm X quote every time somebody says, well, he went to Mecca and changed. I say, no, he said travel broadens you. And I agree with that because, for lack of a better term, it kind of makes you feel small or puts the earth in perspective. And it's not all about the US. It's like other people are in different places. They got their own shit going on, you know, and it's not even remotely connected to what we got going on here. And what Mitch talked about, the traffic, I mean, one of the worst places in the world. I took a 20-minute ride we got called into work late one evening, and it was a 20-minute ride across the Third Mainland Bridge, and it took 3 hours. I'm sitting in the car for 3 hours. But as he said, you know, we as Black people, we're very animated like I am here today, as always. And if we get upset or something, or we get, you know, set off, everybody starts going at it. So you see a lot of that, but it never ends up in anything.
No,
it just diffuses. People walk away. And in Ghana, it's to the point of they won't even let you get to that point. It's like if anybody tries to raise their voice or they feel this, no. And it's a whole, like Sister said, it's a whole different vibe, you know. So yeah, and one of the things when I would get off, I always anticipated this when I would get off the plane in Lagos. I don't know what the city ordinance is, but people burn trash all the time. And then during December, that's the Hamilton time when the cold winds come off the Sahara, which give rise to the hurricanes here, which are the same trade winds that the ships with our people on it followed to get here, right? So when you get off the plane around that time of year, well, for me anyway, I would smell that in the air. And again, like Sister said, it's darker because there's not a lot of light around. You know, you look at one of those world Google Maps and you see where the light is in the world. There's not a lot of light in Africa anywhere. So it's a little bit darker. You smell that air, and it's like, damn, I'm in Africa. It's just a really transforming experience.
So as we begin to wrap things up, we've still got a few minutes, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. For those folks who have considered living abroad, taking that leap of faith, and even though I know it wasn't a planned experience for everybody on this particular show, what are the things that you would recommend that they should research, all things being considered, or that they do need to know? Obviously, they got to have a place to stay. But what would you recommend that they do, given your experience as expats, if they want to take that leap of faith and live outside of the country? What would you say would be the first few things that they seriously need to consider or do if they're planning to make that leap of faith? We'll start off with Mitch, and then we'll go to Uncle Asar, and then we'll go to Coach Tish.
So I would encourage people to reach out to communities of expats online and directly connect with people who are in the country that you're thinking of visiting, so that you can get the inside scoop, because it's a fluid situation, and the information that you may have gotten from a book that was written 3 years ago, 4 years ago, may be completely irrelevant. So there are communities. There's a Black women's expat in Colombia that my wife taps into on a regular basis. Who's doing hair in Colombia? Who do I go to get my nails done or whatever? So those groups are invaluable. We tend to follow our friends. So when they travel, we use them as an advance team so that we can go to next. So if you're going to Thailand, great. I'm going to be coming there next week. I'm going to try to come there when you're going to be there. Let's see if we can make something happen. So we tend to follow the people that we have added into our life. And as we're traveling, we get to meet people who are out there traveling. And so they become part of this extended family. We met Trish in Colombia. So now when we want to go someplace, we go, hey, let's talk about where you have been and let's try to find out where you're going
We
next.
met in Tulsa.
That's true. We originally met in Tulsa, and then we reconnected. But I love the fact that there's this community of people that's out there traveling and exploring and enjoying the world, and they're willing to share, the places that they found, the restaurants that they found, the people that they connected with, and they'll happily share that information if you ask them. So yeah, I would definitely jump online and start getting into these communities and asking the questions that you want, and not be so frightened by the negativity that you might come across. Everybody that's in Medellin, Colombia, is not having their organs removed and having, scopamine. I mean, that sells newspapers, and I get that, but that's not the reality. That's not the day-to-day reality of a place like Medellin. To reduce it to that one story breaks my heart, because that's like trying to reduce New York City to one story. You can't do it.
What say you, Uncle Asar? What recommendation or advice would you give?
Like I said, I may be the wrong person for that question, because it's like, if you get the opportunity, just go wherever it is. But I will tell you this: I'm not going anywhere that I don't know somebody. I either met them here or I met them there, and I've gone places like back to Colombia, where I'm not Colombia, Brazil, where I wasn't with the same people. So I established relationships. So that's one of the things: establish relationships with different people, have them in your life, right? And then, as the sister said, she didn't know what being broke was. I know what being broke is. I've been broke on 2 continents. I mean, absolutely no. People say I'm broke. You got your retirement in the bank, or you got this and that. No, man, I have been broke in the United States of America. I have been completely broke 4,000 miles away from home for 3 years. But I say that to say, be courageous. You're on the earth, man. You can't go wrong if you hook up with good people, right? And just go, man. Be courageous. Just do it.
All right, Coach Tish, what about you?
Definitely, I have to second what the 2 brothers have said, specifically around building relationships. But I think the biggest thing that I would say is, if you have not started seeing a therapist yet, start seeing one. Open Path Collective offers sliding scale therapy for between $40 and $70 a session. Most employers have an employee assistance program where you can ask for a Black therapist. But to start talking to someone, specifically someone who's trained in trauma. I didn't get a chance to speak on that, but I also think that's one of the things that was most surprising to me about being when you're in another country and you're a part of another culture, and you're used to being on the outside or being considered an outsider. And you go to another place where you are having to reimagine all the things that you've been told, and you're living in a space that, the news has told you is dangerous and you shouldn't be there. Like, it really does something to your psyche, and you need to have a trained professional, right? Because you can get around folks who will tell you some things and it won't be helpful for you in the long run. But being able to talk through kind of your experiences and what you're experiencing, and how you're literally putting together all of your thoughts when you go to another place for whatever amount of time. So yeah, that's what I would say. Start seeing a therapist. Definitely make sure you build those relationships. There's Facebook groups for every country. And if you don't have a spiritual practice yet that does not depend on you going into a place, right? So a spiritual practice that you can take with you, that would be helpful as well.
All right, I do have a couple of questions for you, Coach Tish. One is, were you single while you lived abroad? If so, what tips can you give single ladies who would like to live abroad but are afraid of being a woman alone in a foreign country? That is the first question.
So yes, I am single, and I have been single while I lived abroad. Building relationships has, I think, saved me, right? I think, like Uncle Asar said, like, I've never, even though ironically, I've been to all these countries, Malaysia and Bali and Thailand and Colombia. I never go anywhere where I don't know anybody.
Mhm.
So I've met people in Facebook groups, and I message them. We hop on Zoom and we start building relationships, so that, just like when Mitch said, Oh, okay. You in Colombia? I'm on my way. I'm coming. Right.
Part
So
two, in part two to that question, a lot of women alone are viewed as weak or very vulnerable in some of these countries. Would you advise women to move abroad by themselves, or is this all a myth?
I,
Did you understand the question, or do you want me to reread it?
I just disagree with the first part, but maybe reread it because I think my
Okay, a lot
disagreement
of
got
women,
I got caught up in my disagreement. But okay,
a lot of the women alone are viewed weak or very vulnerable in some of these countries. Would you advise women move abroad by themselves, or is this a myth?
so every country is different, right? But what I will say, most countries outside of the US actually has a respect for humanity. And so that
You
extends to
just
a
said a mouthful. You just said a mouthful, but keep going.
but that extends to a respect for women. So unless you doing something crazy, you should be all right.
Got
So if you build the relationships, then you can talk to people who are on the ground about what's actually happening today.
Mhm.
But you got to build the relationships, right? Like the US trains us to kind of only call
Mhm.
people when we need something, as opposed to building so that takes practice. So build relationships with people, and then you can talk to people. You can come visit. You don't have to just show up. If you want to, you can, but I don't believe that the world is a dangerous place. That has not been my experience.
you. I appreciate that. A
Tommy,
couple, yes,
Tommy, no
yes.
one wants to ask what it's like being a single brother in a different country. Anybody got any questions?
Well, that was a sister who asked that question, but that's
I'm
probably
saying, any
why she
brothers?
asked what it's been. But
Can
let
we
me
do that
ask
another
you
show?
this. Let me ask you this, and you brought up a couple of interesting points, and I want to make sure, because each of you kind of do something unique from an entrepreneurship standpoint. I know, Coach Tish, that means you're coaching something. And then Mitch, you're doing something as well. So we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to talk about what you do. So we will do that. Tell me the cliff notes, what your reality was as being a part of the African diaspora outside of the United States versus inside of the United States. I want to try to repeat that. Talk about your experience as being a part of the African diaspora, because I've heard some very interesting things about Native Africans or other Africans who come to the United States and they said, I didn't know I was Black until I got to the United States.
Hmm.
So tell me about your experience, your experiential viewpoint in being a part of the African diaspora outside of the United States in the context where you grew up in the United States, being a Black, being a part of the so-called African diaspora. We'll start with Uncle Assad.
One of the challenges I had coming from diaspora, people knew me and they knew that I was, I guess, well, here's the thing. So people will try to, and the basis of this is that if you've made it to this country other than through Mexico or somewhere in South America where you can come by land and by sea, you have access to money or you have money. So then that puts you in a different class, which is basically how the rest of the world works in terms of classes, right? It's based on money. Africa they say it has a burgeoning middle class, but when I started traveling to Nigeria, there was no middle class. You're either rich or poor. So with that foundation, I'll say that many of the people that I'm associated with, interacting with, are, for lack of a better term, elitist. So they wanted to question my Africanness. Why do you think you're Nigerian? I didn't think I was Nigerian. Why do you think you African? It's like, bruh, you don't, so that was a challenge, right? And again, being fair-skinned, coming from diaspora, it was, like I said, there was privilege in that, but it was also heartbreaking when people address you as a white man. Or, again, I get that guilt when I'm treated with, move to the front of the line, that type of thing. So, again, coming from the diaspora, there's a host of issues, and I'm glad the sister mentioned it about mental health, there's a whole bunch of issues. And she did say that people will tell you something that is not good for you. The way that I coped with it, and I wouldn't advise anybody to do it, I drank a lot. And I didn't even know why I was doing that. It was because I had a lot of idle time, and then I was actually dealing with some trauma of being in a different world, trying to navigate as a Pan-Africanist, loving all our brothers and sisters, but being segregated as an American or a white man. It's a hell of a thing for a brother to call you a white man to your face.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially when you hella black.
Right.
You're like, wait.
I'll be the blackest man in America.
What about you? What say you? You grew up in America. You're called a Negro, a Black, and African American. You go to a different country. How does that reshape or reorient being a part of the African diaspora?
Is that me?
Yes.
So I'll share this. One of the things that we struggled with early on, and then we got over it, is the fact that there are people here in Colombia. There are people when we went to Peru who look just like us, just like me, as dark skinned as I am, don't speak a word of English, are native Peruvian or Colombian. And what freaked us out is, for example, our favorite restaurant here in Colombia is Sazon de mi Negrita.
Yes, go there.
And we love this place. And Monique had a really hard time loving that place because it's like, Negrita. It sounds like they're calling me this bad name, and it's not a cuss word here. It's not an insult here. It's a description. Negrita, you're the little black female, and so she had to kind of get her brain wrapped around that and kind of readjust to not be. I wouldn't say as sensitive, but the folks here. I've heard the same thing about Brazil. I haven't actually been to Brazil yet. It's on my list. That the whole color struck thing may not be as big a deal. I don't feel it here. I mean, again, when I walk down the street in Colombia, I'll see people that, in some cases, are as dark as I am. They're speaking fluent Spanish. They're interacting in society. They don't seem to be held as separate and other. I don't feel like I'm being. That people may have issues with me, but it may be because I'm American, not because I'm African American. I'm dark skinned. So a lot of that stuff kind of recedes into the background for me here when I'm here. I mean, I'm always going to be who I am, but I don't. It's not presented. It's not pushed into my face as you're other. You're different. You're not as good as the rest. As you can speak Spanish. You can hold your own here. You're part of the family, and that to me is a much bigger distinction than what color you are, and that's kind of cool in my opinion.
If I can add on to something the brother said about Brazil, Brazil, it's very interesting, and you have people who you would see that don't look. And incidentally, that's the first. Brazil is the first place that we recorded the first episode of African Genius with a K. You can Google African Genius. Tommy mentions it every week. But you see people who consider themselves of African descent, but they don't look like people of African descent from here. But then we have the beautiful chocolate people like my brother Mitch. But then I had a conversation this past time with a sister, beautiful chocolate skin, deep, right? She said she wasn't black. And I was like, what? And she proceeded to tell me that in the, because I'm in Salvador where the brothers and sisters are. She proceeded to tell me that the Brazilian Constitution or some ridiculous document said that black is an enslaved person. And she was not black. I was like, all right. So we went back and forth with that, no resolution, but I thought that was weird to say that.
Coach Tish, what about you? What do you say?
What's the question again? I'm sorry.
The question is, having lived now in Mexico for 6 years, how has that reframed, coming from the United States in Chicago, when in the, I guess, middle of the 20th century, we were called Negroes, and then, of course, African Americans and or blacks. But you travel to the world, and it's a whole different response to you as a person of the African diaspora. How has living outside the United States changed or reshaped, having lived in a country where everything was pretty much created classism by the skin of your color? Now you live outside of the United States. How has that reshaped your thinking, having lived outside of the U.S.?
So I think in the US, I was considered myself on the bottom, right? Even though I have a degree, multiple degrees, my family is working class, live in the hood. My mother got on the plane for the first time when I bought her ticket and she came here. So like that's where I come from. But then coming to another place where I have passport privilege. So now it's like it's flipped, right? Because I speak it's not about me being black. As a matter of fact, because I speak Spanish, typically people think I'm Dominican or Puerto Rican or like something other than American. And so it's a very weird. It took a minute for me because again, in my mind, I didn't have a lot of money. So I'm like, I can afford a housekeeper and a massage therapist to come to the house, but I don't have a lot of money. I don't have the US version of a lot. But in Mexico, it's, solid upper middle. So, it was very much so a mind flip type situation.
Gotcha. All right. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to have everyone to tell us a little bit about what you do, and then I've already put in how to get in contact with you, but tell us a little bit about what you do, and we'll close out. I've already been asked by one of our guests, you're going to have a part 2 of this conversation. I think somebody had to leave a little bit earlier who was in the chat session. So obviously somebody enjoyed the information that you shared. So we're going to have a part 2 of this conversation. So tell us a little bit about, if you do something in the entrepreneurial space, coaching or whatever you do, and then we will wrap up this show. And I thank you so much for the insight that you've shared today. So we'll start out with Coach, and then we'll round to the fellas.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I call myself a freedom mindset coach. I work primarily in the mental health space, helping people to get free from the things that bind us, right? Like all of these systems of oppression that we're part of, these ideas that we've been thinking and don't know that we're thinking until we try to do something that is outside of the norm, right? That's when you realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm always thinking in terms of all or nothing, right? I either gotta sell everything or stay on US soil, right? Like we think in those ways, and that's one of the things that is huge. So I created something called the Imposter Freedom Leadership Academy, where I work with leaders and helping them to really talk about and talk through the things that bind them, right? And keep them bound. So fear, failure, perfectionism, self-doubt, right? All of the things that prevent us from really achieving whatever freedom we imagine.
Good deal. And we can find you on @CoachTish on what social media platforms?
Instagram.
Good deal.
Yeah.
All right. Next, Mitch.
Yes. So again, Tommy, thank you so much for having me. And I'm happy that I'm actually visible and audible. I am a real estate investor. My wife and I got started investing back in 1999, way back then. These days, I work with real estate operators who are looking for funding. I provide funding for folks to do real estate deals, development deals, and I also work with private individuals who are looking to put their money to work, doing a real estate investment and getting an attractive return for their funds. And my wife and I have been digital nomads since 2018. We sold our house back then and started living domestically as nomads. And that's how we ended up in Tulsa. And then when Tulsa got minus 26 degrees in December 2022, we looked at each other and said, this is not working. And a friend just happened to be coming to Medellin, and that's how we ended up exploring here. But the fact that we can do what we do from anywhere in the world means why not do it someplace beautiful and warm and affordable? And so that's why we're here and we love it. And we're trying to encourage as many people as we can to at least sample. I'm not saying you have to come move out here forever, but just sample it for yourself and then see if the lies that you've been told hold up.
All right. And Uncle, let's talk. Tell us a little bit about what you do on the African Genius podcast and whatever makes sense for you to share with our guests.
So for the Pan-Africanist, the question is not what do you do for work, but what do you do when you're not working? But to conform, I will tell you that what I do in this capitalist system to make money, I am a senior academic advisor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Texas. And like the sister, I have been a a counselor or a director of a counseling program, senior management, middle management for over 30 years. And with the African Genius podcast is to answer the question, what do I do when I'm not working? Although we've been on hiatus for several months, and part of that is due to power cuts in South Africa and some other things. But we're gonna gear up again and do that. So Pan-Africanist podcast, we talk about all things Pan-Africanist, and I co-host the show with brother out of South Africa, Wesley Pepper, who is a visual artist, and it's a side project for him, part of his Art Lexia podcast, which promotes all things art in South Africa. And I'm on my way to Joburg.
All right. So we want to thank you so much for the insight that you shared today. I know our guests have gotten some value from this, whether they are on now or whether they're going to see this show after this. And obviously, we have been voluntold that we're going to have an additional conversation to talk about this a little bit more. So we want to thank you for your insight and look forward to having you in the future. And good night, everyone. We'll look forward to seeing you on next Wednesday because, of course, if it is Wednesday night, it is Black Men Speak. Thank you.
Free